All right, we are waiting for President Obama to begin his news conference with Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Attention will be paid to what President Obama has to say about the latest developments in Egypt. And President Hosni Mubarak continues to hold on to power there. We'll be obviously paying very special attention to what happens with him. Joining us now from Washington, Ed Husain. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and the author of the book, The Islamist: Why I Joined Radical Islam in Britain, What I Saw Inside, and Why I Left. So a very interesting read, to be sure, Ed, and we're glad to have you here to comment when we do hear what the president has to say. Let me just get your take before we go to the president's speech, before he steps up to the podium. What do you think, what would you like to be hearing from the White House now?
I think the most sensible statement coming out of the White House would be to say that the White House has been restrained, has stayed out of Egyptian affairs thus far, but, you know, not just U.S. interests, but regional economic interests are at stake, and it's wrong and unfair of one man to be standing at the helm of mass change that the Egyptian people have demanded day in, day out now for 11 days. And it's only dignified and magnanimous of the president, i.e. Hosni Mubarak, to step aside immediately and make way for a transition government that then brings about free and fair elections.
Let me also ask you, because of the title of your book, The Islamist, it brings up a couple of things that I've been reading about. The Ayatollah in Iran has said that this is an Islamist liberation, although the Muslim Brotherhood has said they won't be putting forth a candidate for presidency. They want to hold back a little bit so that the rest of the world doesn't think it's sort of a religious takeover of the government there. What's your view on what we're likely to see after President Mubarak, if or when he leaves?
I think it's a question of when he leaves, and assuming he leaves pretty soon, there will be uncertainty in Egypt. There will be some level of chaos in Egypt. There is no certain successor to Mubarak, and that's the beauty and the joy of democracy, and we ought to welcome and embrace that uncertainty and that potential for newness and change. I think that the Khamenei people in Iran are wrong. Their whole attitude towards this is to stoke, a mass pop uprising in order to ensure that their sympathizers get into power. Iranians don't have a vast level of sympathy on the streets of Cairo. The people who are leading the current demonstrations are people with tattoos, the internet generation, Facebook, Twitter generation. They are not the kind of people of 1979, but they're the kind of opposition we saw in Iran in 2009. So I think if there's a free and fair elections tomorrow, yes, the Islamists or the radicals will win probably 25 to 35% of the popular vote in parliament, but they don't have a Khomeini-type figure to unite the Egyptian people behind an extremist cleric yet, thank God.
Well, let me ask you, because of you mentioned the uprisings that we saw in Iran. They were put down with really no help from the U.S. Do you think that there's a risk of policy here from the U.S. that isn't the same for Egypt as it was for Iran? I mean, I've heard a lot of criticism from Iranians that the president didn't step in then.
Yeah, I mean, the Iranians haven't really forgiven the U.S. for 2009, and they've got a deeper issue with the U.S. standing by back in 1979, when there were huge expressions of wanting freedom and democracy against the Iranian Shah, and what happened was, with the US wanting to then support the Shah and oppose the then popular uprisings that were led by communists and leftists and secularists and farmers, and yes, some radical Islamists. But as we saw, the US standing on the wayside then led to Khomeini and the Islamists taking over power and getting rid of those who are from a more sort of normative political outlook. The real risk here is that if we in the West continue to ignore the plight and the demands of the ordinary Egyptians, and then we stand by, quote unquote, our man in Cairo for want of some kind of stability in the region, we realize that A, this man Mubarak and his regime have not provided that level of stability, B, they're leaving a country potentially with the Muslim Brotherhood and other forces on the rise, and C, in the long term it poses greater problems for the US and its partners in the area than it does in the short term to swallow the bitter pill and see through these elections. And it might be that the Muslim Brotherhood and others might dominate in Parliament, but as I say, they don't have a figure to dominate the executive. And even if they were to dominate Parliament, it's part and parcel of a free and fair electoral system that let them come in, let them dominate, let them win, for as long as they are broadly in support of human rights, broadly in support of not imposing a confrontational Islamist state, and broadly in recognition of Israel. Those are the debating issues that we need to bring to the table. And my worry is by the US and others staying away from the discussion and allowing others to dominate, we're not getting what we need on the table.
All right, we're talking to Ed Husain. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, obviously talking about the situation in Egypt.